and welcome to Town Hall 2025. I'm your moderator, Daniel Crow. The original Town Hall was hosted by Jack Faust, a true giant of Oregon history from 1980 until 1993. Town Hall was a weekly public affairs program on Channel 2, featuring discussions, often contentious, between public officials, experts, and everyday Oregonians on topics that range from the serious, like child abuse, to the somewhat less so, like Bigfoot. Halfway through his run, Jack even had on a young 16-year-old from Mount Angel on his way to West Point. Yours truly. With Jack's blessing, it is my great honor and solemn responsibility to carry on the baton that Jack carried so well. Our goal here is to revive that spirit of robust, peaceable public debate, which has always characterized our Oregon way. Together, I think that we can do some good for all of our people. And we began with Series 1, the race for Oregon Republican Party Chair 2025. Soon to come, Series 2, the race for Oregon Democratic Party Chair 2025. If you, our audience, decide that talking with one another rather than past one another is preferable, well, maybe we'll be getting to know each other a little bit better. Welcome to Town Hall 2025, Series 1, the race for Oregon Republican Party Chair. I'm your host, Daniel Crow, and before we begin, I'd like to lay out the ground rules that were provided to each of the candidates beforehand. We begin with two special series. Series 1, the race for Oregon Republican Party Chair 2025, soon to be followed by Series 2, the race for Democratic Party Chair 2025. Since Oregon Republicans will choose their leader first on February 22nd, we will begin with them. Oregon Democrats will choose their leader on March 12th. For Series 1, we've invited all 7 declared candidates for Oregon Republican Party Chair to appear on our program. In alphabetical order, candidates Gabe Bueller, Jerry Cummings, Ben Edel, Joe Ray Perkins, and Angelita Sanchez have accepted, and we will be recording an episode for each of them. Candidates Richard Jolly and the current Oregon Republican Party Chair Justin Huang have either declined or not responded at all. When we sent out the invitations, every candidate was given this preface and a list of the 3 subject areas that we intend to cover. Section 1, your executive experience. Section 2, Oregon culture and political history. And Section 3, the role of the Oregon Republican Party going forward. None of the candidates were provided the questions we intend to ask, but we encouraged all of them to carefully review the Oregon Republican Party bylaws and platform, as we intend to explore those areas with specificity. My role in this program is to act as moderator, not judge. I'm not here to pick either the Republican or the Democratic Party chair. Therefore, anything which you, our viewers, might interpret as a personal opinion on my part should be disregarded. Except for my 81-year-old mom, still living in Mount Angel, who cares about my opinion anyway. Each candidate is a guest, and this is Oregon. Therefore, each guest will be treated with compassion, dignity, and respect. But these men and women are campaigning for a position of public responsibility. Therefore, my questions are designed to be neither easy nor comfortable to answer. To keep us honest, we will invite a well-respected county chair from the party we are interviewing for each series. In Series 1, the race for Oregon Republican Party Chair, we are joined by Baker County Republican Party Chair Danny Johnson, who will act as referee. He is uncommitted to any particular candidate, which is important. For Series 2, the race for Oregon Democratic Party Chair, our referee will be an uncommitted and universally respected county chair from the Oregon Democratic Party to ensure that every candidate is treated fairly, yet firmly. Each candidate guest will have 3 challenge flags that they can throw at any point during our discussion if they feel that they need more time to answer a question or if they feel my questioning is unfair in any way. If the candidate wants to use his or her challenge flag, they will state their objection, and Chair Johnson in this series will rule on it. In each series, the referee's ruling will be final. In Series 1, Chair Johnson will follow up with his own questions after each of our 3 subject areas. His job is to explore areas which he believes are relevant to understanding each candidate as a potential future state chair. Since the county chairs actually have to work alongside their state party chair, I'm interested in what the county chair thinks is important. I also want to note that our referee has complete discretion to ask whatever he wants, but I have reminded each of them that they are speaking for all of their fellow county chairs. If you, our audience, find this longer format discussion worthwhile, we intend to move forward with subsequent series on all of Oregon's political parties, major and minor. Each party will provide a well-respected, uncommitted county chair for their own party to help us ensure that our conversations are substantial and informative. Later this summer, we intend to branch out to address issues that Oregonians and Friends of Oregon care about: public health, education, abortion, gun rights, governmental power, the growing urban-rural divide, land use planning, and so forth and so on. As I mentioned in our pre-taped intro, our goal here is to revive that spirit of robust, public, peaceable debate, which has always characterized our Oregon way. Oregonians don't find shouting persuasive, and I believe that our people are starving for substantive, grown-up conversations about matters which impact us all, because I believe in you. A good man, former Montana Attorney General Tim Fox, once taught me something about why we even have politics. And I quote, "Politics exists so that we can live in peace alongside those with whom we will never agree." As a career professional soldier and lifelong Oregonian, I think politics matters a lot. After all, civil wars are far easier to start than they are to stop. With all of that having said, let us move to Section 1, your executive experience. Before we begin with questions and answers, though, I'd like to give you, Jerry Cummings, an opportunity to introduce yourself and tell us why you are running for Oregon Republican Party chair. Jerry, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Daniel. I am Jerry Cummings. I'm running for the Oregon Republican Party chairman because I believe that Oregon is at a critical point in its history. Right now in Oregon, we have people living in the streets, on the sidewalks, in tents. We have children being sold drugs that are poisoned with fentanyl. We have an out of control bureaucracy that is spending us into bankruptcy, and our economy is tanking. If you go right now, speaking of tanks, if you go right now to fill up your gas tank in an urban area of Oregon, you're likely to pay as much as $1 more than some other Americans per gallon. If you go buy a carton of eggs or a jug of milk, you're going to see that you're paying far more than you were paying just 3 or 4 years ago, far more than you would expect from a natural, normal rate of inflation. What do these problems all have in common? The answer is we have one single party that has been ruling and running our state for decades, and they're not doing a good job. It's corrupt, it's inept, and the corruption and the lack of competence has got to stop. The only way out of this mess is to unify the Republican Party, bring non-affiliated voters and third-party voters together into a coalition that says we must stop this train before it goes off a cliff. We've got to fire the people in charge, and we've got to put new leadership in the governor's mansion, at the state house, and the state senate. We need new representation in Congress because Oregon is on a collision course with destruction. The only way to stop it is to change our leadership. The only hope that Oregon has for a change in leadership is the Republican Party. The Republican Party has to become more unified than it has been in the past several years, and it has to become more well organized than it has been in the past several years. In order to do that, we have to stop fighting with each other and focus on the mission of rescuing Oregon before it's too late.
Thank you. Jerry, may I call you Jerry?
You may.
Thank you. So it's my understanding that you grew up in Washington State. So please tell our viewers a little bit about how you ended up living in Columbia County.
Thank you. I appreciate that opportunity. So as many of the viewers may know, but some may not know, since I was a teenager, I have been a Baptist minister, and I answered the call of God to ministry at 17 years old in 1991. I entered seminary in 1991, and several years later, I became a missionary in Northern California on an Indian reservation where I was invited by a group of Hupa Indians to come and help them plant a Baptist church in their community. I was there for several years, and then in 2002, I accepted a call to a church in Winston, Oregon, in Douglas County, Oregon, and spent many years there. I had 3 children there. And then due to some life and family changes and changes in call, I returned to my home state of Washington for a few years. In 2016, as I was wrapping up my time at a church in Shelton as children's pastor and wrapping up my time as the chairman of both my legislative district Republican Party and my county Republican Party, I started moving back to the Portland area. And since 2017, I have been the pastor of the Haven Missionary Baptist Church in St. Helens, Oregon. So, of my six children, the oldest is adopted. All five of the others were born in Oregon. My wife is from Portland, and Oregon is our home.
Excellent. From the outside, each party can look like a monolith. But anyone who has spent time in politics knows that political parties are comprised of constantly shifting coalitions which organize around issues that they believe are the most urgent facing the people they serve. How would you describe the current Oregon Republican Party coalition?
I would describe it as needs improvement. I believe that right now we are very fractured, and my least favorite word in the Republican lexicon is the acronym RHINO, which is supposed to stand for Republican in name only, but really what it means is a Republican who disagrees with me on more than two issues. Um, it has become an unnecessary appellation that we just throw at each other meaninglessly. Really, the definition of a Republican in name only is a Republican who doesn't turn out to vote in November because they didn't get their way in the primary. That's really what it means to be a Republican in name only. If you don't get your candidate, you don't show up to support the nominee of the party. I would describe the party right now as desperately needing unity, and that needs to come from the top down. We, as Republican leaders, like Danny in the county, myself in the ORP, we need to be demonstrating what unity looks like by reaching out to Republicans who don't agree with me on every single issue, who might describe themselves with a different hyphen. We say I'm a conservative Republican, or I'm a Christian conservative Republican, or we say I'm a fiscal conservative Republican. We have all of these different labels. I would like to take all the hyphens off and say I'm a Republican. American republicanism is founded on two key principles. One is the idea of representative government, and the other is the idea of natural, God given human rights that every person is born with because they are a gift from God and they cannot be taken. They can only be violated or protected by government. If we agree on those two fundamental principles of what it means to be an American Republican, then Daniel, there's no reason that we can't set aside the 20% of things that two Republicans might disagree on to focus on accomplishing the 80% of things that we do agree on.
From 1859 to 1985, Oregon Republicans dominated Oregon politics. Since 1986, not so much. What changed?
A lot of things changed. One of the things that has changed is simply a demographic change. As more and more people have moved into the Pacific Northwest from places like California, we've seen a greater influx of people with more liberal political and social views. I think that's part of it. Another thing that has changed is that the Oregonian the Oregonian culture has been shifting into two different culture groups. Primarily, you'll see these really amplified if you just look at the difference between Eastern Oregon and Western Oregon. You'll see the same thing if you go above the river to Washington. It's really not so much Eastern Oregon versus Western Oregon as it is the Pacific Northwest versus the Inland Northwest. But when you look at these different cultural groups, you will see that people on the eastern side of the state are far more conservative generally, and people on the western side of the state are far more socially and politically liberal generally. I say generally because Pacific Northwesterners, whether you're talking about Oregonians or Washingtonians or people in Idaho in the inland Northwest and in the eastern parts of our states, Northwesterners are not that easy to put in boxes, Daniel, as you very well know. As Oregonians, we are free thinkers. As Oregonians, none of us fit neatly into a political box where you can put a label on us that is all encompassing. But generally speaking, I think the primary reason for the change is that the influx of people from California bringing more liberal views to the western side of the state has been a huge portion of that. I also think that the reality is the Republican Party and the Democratic Party, they each are finding their footing in every generation, right? We had a generation of leaders during the Reagan era that allowed Oregon to be a state that was carried by a Republican. Today, I believe the Republican Party as a whole, and I'm not just speaking of the elected officers of the Oregon Republican Party, but Republicans as a whole We need leaders who are visionary. We need leaders who are unifying, and we need visitors who can reach out to people who are not who do not self-identify as Republicans. Right now, there's a more than 200,000 person gap between the voter registration for Democrats and those who are registered as Republicans in the state of Oregon. That's huge, Daniel. That means that in order to overcome their automatic advantage, we need approximately 90% of Republicans to turn out in a statewide race. We need to get 60% of the non-affiliated voters and third-party voters, and we need to get about 20% of Democrats in order to win. So that makes a very big difference. What we need are leaders, and we need candidates who can reach outside of the base of the Republican Party and bring people in to our tent.
For our viewers, you mentioned that there's a 200,000 difference between registered Democrats in Oregon and registered Republicans. Can you tell, for the viewers' benefit, can you tell them about how many registered voters we have in a population of 4.3 million?
If my memory serves, it is approximately 2.3 million, I believe.
Okay. So about 10% is the registration disadvantage for Oregon Republicans.
Yes. And keep in mind, there are actually more non-affiliated voter registrations than there are Democrat or Republican. The interesting thing about that group is that if they're not affiliated with a party, they're also much less likely to vote. So we really don't. It's easy to say, well, most of those are Democrats or most of those are Republicans, but we really don't know that because only about 50 to 55% of them turn out to vote in a given election.
Many Oregon elected officials of all parties consider the activist base of their respective political parties to be dumping grounds for malcontents and out-of-touch ideologues. How has your experience equipped you to herd these cats?
Well, I don't think that would be a description I would use to describe the most active and the most passionate Republicans in the state of Oregon, but I do understand the sentiment. My concern is that we need to be able to bring those who are somewhat like myself. I like to think that I'm a pretty right-wing conservative person. My positions on issues line up with the base of our party fairly well. But I also believe that I need to work together with Republicans whose focus isn't the same as mine, who don't have the same number one issues. And I think that the best way that we can, as you say, herd those cats is to give them a vision. And when you give them a vision and focus them on winning elections and you give them something to do, they have less time to sit on social media throwing stones at each other. They have less time to argue because they're focused on winning. And one of the things that you will see is that in the locker room after a game, the team that is most likely to be blaming each other and pointing fingers at each other and attacking the referees is the team that loses. So putting some W's on the board would also go a long way toward party unity and bringing people together. But I think our first step is simply to have a vision to get something done, a plan to accomplish it, and to put people to work so that they are not sitting around feeling like they're disillusioned and disaffected and disconnected because they actually have something positive to do that contributes to getting Republicans elected.
What do you believe is possible for the Oregon Republican Party chair to accomplish, and how will we be able to measure whether your tenure is a success or failure?
That's a great question, Daniel. The reason I say it's a great question is because I think it's something that most people have never really thought about. It's easy to say we didn't win the governor's mansion. We didn't win. Our candidate didn't carry Oregon in the presidential race. We didn't win a particular congressional seat or a House seat or a state Senate seat. But the reality is the function of the chairman of the Republican Party, though the Republican Party's number one purpose is to win election, the function of the chairman of the Republican Party really has to do with fundraising and infrastructure. And so one of the ways that you'll be able to tell that I will be being successful or not as the new chairman of the Oregon Republican Party is to see if we're becoming more organized and we're raising more money. If we are organized, what you will see is a better get out the vote ground game. You'll see us doing better with our phone banking, with our canvassing, and with our activity in the final 6 weeks leading into the election. You'll also see that we're doing better with messaging and you'll see that we are more proactive about being in front of issues rather than trying to play catch up after someone else is setting the agenda for the conversation. You will also see that in our process of choosing candidates, that while we as party leaders do not choose the candidates, we will be actively trying to make sure that all of the primary candidates can be heard and can be seen so that Republicans can make the best choice they can make. And then we will take the candidate that the voters give us, the Republican voters give us, and we will do our best to bring as many of them over the finish line as we can.
Chair Johnson, this concludes the section, my part of section one. And so I see that we don't have Chair Johnson on the video right now. And so Chair Johnson, you're muted. So if you can unmute, there you go. I'd like to hand the floor over to Chair Johnson, one of the county chairs, for him to ask any follow-up questions that he thinks are appropriate for the consideration of our audience.
Well, Jerry, I think one of the things that I'm wondering about, maybe we've already touched base on this, over the past 40 plus years, the ORP delegates have elected chairs and a number of different chairs. But during that time, Oregon has either not elected or maybe one or two have been successful over this time for either a Republican governor or more than likely Secretary of State. What would be your concerns as to putting together a project to reverse that trend?
I think the short answer to your question, Danny, is we need to find a candidate and we need to support the candidate who can reach out across to non-affiliated voters, to third-party voters, and we can build a coalition. We are facing a more than $200,000 voter registration gap. That means there is an advantage to the Democratic candidate of a couple of 100,000 just in terms of the registered Democrats versus registered Republicans. The reality is, if we turned out every Republican to vote based on the average Democratic voter turnout in previous gubernatorial elections, we would not be able to defeat their regular turnout with every single Republican unless we also get a large portion of NAVs to join with us. What's really happening in the area of state elections is we're seeing the bloated condition of the four big blue liberal states, liberal counties in our state that have swelled with, shall we say, transplants from other states that have moved in, that have shifted more and more to the left over those 4 decades you mentioned. What I believe we need to do is we need to come at this from a different approach. First of all, we need to put a candidate in front of the voters that is different, that is going to have a message and even a personality that reaches beyond the Republican base. Secondly, we also need to think about the fact that we need to show the state of Oregon what Republican leadership looks like. What I mean by that is, if we focus on targeting certain House districts and Senate districts for the state legislature, where we can pick up seats in 26 and in 28 and in 2030, by getting more and more Republican leadership in the state, we can let them see what the difference is between Republican policies becoming practice and Republican ideas becoming laws, and how that looks different than the way that Democrats have run the state over the years. It may be that 2026 will be the year that we get a Republican governor elected. It may be 2030. But the primary thing that we need to be focused on is getting Republicans in leadership positions where we can showcase the difference between Republican leadership and Democrat leadership.
Also, I remember we've had the conversation just earlier here in regard to fundraising and money. Money is the milk of politics, unfortunately. There are many individuals and PAC organizations competing for those dollars from donors. How can donors know where their hard-earned money and dollars are going so that they go to the candidates and not to the PAC special interests for overhead and travel and everything else, where we can get a majority of the money to the candidates? Where does the ORP fit into that matrix?
That's a good question. So obviously, one of the ways that they can know that it goes to the candidates is by donating directly to the candidates. But if they're donating money to the Oregon Republican Party, or they're donating money to their congressional district Republican committee or their county central committee, they cannot earmark it, in the sense that they cannot say, I want to give this money and I want you to give it to this candidate. But most of us at the county level, the CD level, and the state level believe in what it says in our bylaws. The number one purpose of the Oregon Republican Party is to get Republicans elected to office. Winning elections has to be the key. So whether we do that with independent expenditures or we do that with direct contributions to candidates, what we have to do is show the donors that we are responsible with their dollars, that we are able to target and select contestable races. A contestable race means it's not safe red, it's not safe blue, it's not obviously going to go for the Democrat, it's not obviously going to go for the Republican. It's contestable, where we have weak Democrats, strong Republicans, and we have a winnable race. If they see us responsibly spending money in races that are contestable, and they see us focusing on winning elections, then donor confidence will return. It's probably not something that's going to happen overnight. It's not going to be as simple as the Republican State Central Committee elects the right chairman and all of a sudden millions of dollars come flooding in. The other reality that we're facing is campaign finance reform. Coming up in less than 2 years from right now, for the next cycle after this one, there are going to be significant caps placed on what a party can raise from a single donor. So we will need to begin now working together with people like me as the chairman of the Republican Party, and people like Danny Johnson as the chairman of Baker County Republican Party. We need to start building those relationships and putting things in place now to where we are partnering together and we are working together across the 34 organized Republican parties in this state, county parties, that is, within this state, so that we have our, if I can just put it bluntly, we have our act together. If they don't see that we are focusing on building that ground game, that GOTV, and they don't see that we are focused on infrastructure, and they don't see that we are focused on targeting contestable races that we can win, no one who cares about where their money goes is going to give us money. So we're going to need to be working with major donors. We're going to need to be building our membership drive like we never have before. The membership drive are those $10 to $15 monthly donations. We need to reach out and build that donor base, but that all starts with donor confidence. And you can't have donor confidence unless the party really comes together, and at every level, from the PCPs in your county to the congressional district executive committees to the ORP, all of us have to be working together and not constantly fighting each other and going to war with each other.
Thank you.
Excellent. Danny, Chair Johnson, thank you so much for your insights and your questions. Now we're going to move to Section 2, Oregon Culture and Political History. Concerning Oregon culture, Oregon entered the Union in 1859. From April 12th of 1861 to May 26th of 1865, what nationally significant event occurred?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that?
Yes.
There was a background noise.
So from April 12th, 1861 until May 26th, 1865, what nationally significant event occurred?
The Civil War.
And what was the Civil War about?
The Civil War was about primarily it was about the issue of states' rights versus federal authority. And obviously the issue that was the powder keg that blew that question up was slavery. In a very real sense, it's an issue that had divided the North and the South since before the Revolution. Though there were slaves in the North, it was much smaller amount. Of course, it was much more rare in northern states than it was in southern states. But even before the Revolutionary War, the question of whether or not the unconscionable blight on human civilization known as slavery should be tolerated in a free society, that question was debated at the Constitutional Convention. That question led to what we refer to as the Missouri Compromise over the years, and we saw this continue to tear the nation apart. And really, what it came down to was: is there a role for the federal government to have in defending and protecting the individual rights of a person within a state, or are the states so autonomous within our union of states that because of that state autonomy, there is no role for the federal government to play in how a state uses or defends or protects or abuses the rights of its citizens? So I think that the answer is not as simple as to say one word, slavery. It's also not as simple as saying it was over states' rights. I think it comes down to the question of what is the United States? We are not a nation state. We are a nation of states, a federation government, one of only a few in the world at the current time, and one of only. We are without a doubt the longest running successful constitutional republic of a federation of independent states in the history of the modern world. The closest thing to it you might find is the ancient Sumerian states in Mesopotamia, or the ancient Greek states. But what we were trying to decide as a people that we couldn't seem to work out peaceably is: what is the soul of America about? Who are we as a people? And how much of our identity do we want to rest in our states versus how much do we want it to mean that I'm an Oregonian? How much do we want it to mean that I'm an American? And I believe that the Civil War is a tragedy that should never have happened. And I wish that the leaders in the 1850s had been able to come together and focus on a way to avoid bloodshed. But my party, the Republican Party, was founded by abolitionists. We have always been the party of civil rights. We have always been the party of individual liberty. We have always been the party of morality. Slavery is wrong. Contrary to common misconception, we didn't end slavery at the end of the Civil War. There is more human trafficking in the world today than there has ever been at any time in human history. There are more people living in bondage in one form or another, whether it's as forced sex workers or it's sold into bondage in places where it's still legal. There are more people being trafficked, more humans being trafficked today than at any time in the history of the world. So I will say definitively, my party has always been the party of civil rights. We've always been the party of human liberty. We've always been the party that defends the individual. But at the same time, we are also the party that believes that we are a federation nation. We are not a nation state. We are a nation of states. And we recognize that Oregonians have the right to govern Oregon according to the dictates of our conscience within the Republican system that we have been given and guaranteed by the U.S. Constitution. So I believe that the simple answer to your question is we were trying to find the balance between states' rights, individual rights, and federal responsibility.
And the Republican form of government that the Constitution guarantees the citizens of the several states, is that a little r Republican form of government or a big R Republican form of government?
It's a little r Republican form of government. As I mentioned earlier, the principles of American republicanism. Thomas Jefferson said it well. We are all Federalists. We are all Republicans. And it's what he said in his first, I believe, it was his first inaugural address. When we say that we are Federalists, what we mean is we are one nation under God. but we are also 50 autonomous states. And so when we say we are federalists, we believe there is a balance between our national identity and our union and our state individuality and the ability that we have for self-governance. Republican form of government means that we're a representative form of government. We elect leaders and then we let them lead us. If we don't like the way they lead us, then we don't re-elect them. It also means that we are a country founded in the concept of natural rights. Natural rights are natural because they come from God, not from men. We can't vote them into existence. We can't vote them out of existence. It is the role of government to protect the rights of its citizens. And so that's what I mean when I say we have, that's what I mean. And that's what I believe the Constitution means when it says a Republican form of government.
Okay. Circling back to Oregon's entry in the Union in 1859, why was Oregon's entry into the Union on the eve of the Civil War significant?
Because one of the questions that had to be decided was, will new states being added, will they, one, participate in the Civil War? Two, would they be slave states or free states? And so it was significant because in a very real sense, you might say, Oregon was an opportunity. It was a demonstration of what makes America great. The Oregon territory at large, not just what became the state of Oregon, is a microcosm of the American dream. You can take your family and you can risk everything and sell everything you own and only take what you can fit in a covered wagon, and you can brave the hardships of the winters and face the dangers of the wilderness and potentially not get there with your entire family still alive. But when you get there, you have the opportunity to tame the wilderness and build the American dream. Oregon, for me, during the time of the Civil War, stands as a beacon of hope. You know, my family has been in the Pacific Northwest since 1889. 1888. We weren't here in the 1850s, but we have been here, for well over a century. And to me, that pioneering spirit of the Oregon Trail is a reminder to the people who were fighting in the Civil War of what they were fighting for. They were fighting for the American dream.
Did abolitionism form a key part of the Oregon Republican identity from your perspective? And I think you've already addressed that a little bit, but I'd like you to go into that a little bit more about the difference, what abolitionism is and why it was so significant to the original Oregon identity.
I believe it always has been a part of the Oregon Republican identity. That's one of the reasons that the Oregon Republican Party, just like the Republican Party at large in America, existed was we believe that every person has a right to be free. We believe that every person has the right to be free in their person. They have the right to not be in forced captivity or forced labor. We believe that the human conscience, the human spirit made in the image of God, cannot be owned. It belongs to God and to the person that he gave that spirit to. So I believe that it's always been part of the Republican identity as a party, whether in Oregon or anywhere else in the country. But I think that was really important in a place like Oregon during the years of the Civil War and shortly after, as the nation was struggling to answer questions about what those things mean.
Thank you. Now I'd like to focus back a little bit and look at things a little more broadly. Can you share with us what is the idea of Oregon to you?
The idea of Oregon to me is opportunity. Oregon is ranked one of the highest states in the nation on natural resources and natural beauty. Yet we are ranked in the 40s in areas like the economy, economic opportunity, education. That concerns me, Daniel. It concerns me because I'm a parent. It concerns me because I'm a pastor. It concerns me because I'm an Oregonian. And as someone who has served on a school board, as someone who has raised children in Oregon, I want to know that the economic opportunities and the opportunity to be free in their persons is going to be available to my children, my grandchildren, and to the kids who come through our education system. It concerns me today that Oregon is a state that is losing its way because our leaders have no vision and they seem to have no positive direction to bring us forward into a better tomorrow. This Oregon dream, the idea of the Oregon Trail, is still alive and well in the hearts and minds of Oregonians, though. People who live here and whose families have lived in the Northwest for generations know and understand that we are a perseverant people. We are a people that overcomes obstacles. We are a people that does not take no for an answer from life. And so I believe that the meaning of Oregon to me can be summed up in the word opportunity.
In 2008, Nate Silver published an analysis of Oregon political affiliation in which he found that Oregon Republicans are the most conservative in the nation and Oregon Democrats are the most liberal. What implications, if any, do you believe that has for the future of Oregon?
You know, in any other state, I would say that means you're in real trouble because how in the world are you ever going to get along? However, we are Oregonians. And as you alluded to earlier, historically, right now, nationwide across the country, for some reason, it's vitriolic in the realm of politics. You know what I'm referring to. There's people just name calling, and we're all living in our echo chambers, and nobody's really listening to each other. But I believe that the Oregon spirit will prevail. We Oregonians have historically been more open to understanding different worldview systems, different points of view in how we see the world. I believe that the fact that our leftists, if you will, are more leftist and our right wingers are more right wing, it doesn't need to be a powder keg always waiting for an explosion, Daniel, because in Oregon we've always been people who are able to dialogue with each other and allow someone who lives next to me to disagree with me. You know, I happen to live in the same small community in Warren, Oregon, where Betsy Johnson lives. Betsy and I sat down over a hamburger and talked about our families and our hobbies and our interests. And, you know, the fact that I've never voted for her never came up in the conversation. Even though she knows that I'm an active Republican and I never voted for her, but we've been able to just sit down and have a meal together and not fight with each other over these issues. And I think that's what most of us do, even at our family gatherings. You know, we generally host our relatives in Oregon on Thanksgiving and Christmas, and we have some people who are very liberal Democrat, and some, of course, like myself, were very conservative Republicans sitting down to dinner together, and we can dialogue, we can talk about it, and we don't have to fight about it. And I believe that that's one of the things that makes Oregon Oregon. It is concerning to me that we do have a very big gap between the left and the right, but it is interesting how many people are in the middle. I believe that the party that is going to be shaping Oregon's future over the next 5, 10, 15, 20, and then for the rest of this century is going to be the party that learns how to speak to the people who do not self-identify as being very liberal or very conservative, but what they want is a functioning government. What they want is the ability to have an economy that is working and well regulated. And if we can give them that, whether it's the Democrats or the Republicans, that's the party that they're going to gravitate toward.
Cordial discussions are always great. But when was the last time you appeared in front of a hostile audience, and how did you deal with that?
You know, sometimes I think the most hostile audience I can stand before is the base of the Republican Party when I'm talking about unity, and I do that on a fairly regular basis. I believe we need unity not only within the Republican Party, but we need unity as Oregonians. We have major problems that need to be solved, and honestly, I would be happy to say without any reservation that I believe that an overabundance of liberalism in our government has created or has certainly not solved those problems. However, nobody ever fixed the problem by fixing the blame. What Oregon needs more than anything right now is for Oregonian leaders to come together and find solutions to the problems that we have. And it's that lack of willingness or ability to come together and find solutions that is allowing things to get worse and worse. So for me, when I'm standing in front of a group of what I like to call hardcore conservatives, which I am one. Don't misunderstand. I'm not a moderate. I'm not a left-leaning Republican. I am a hardcore conservative. But I think that we have to come to a place where we understand there aren't enough of us to call us the majority of Oregonians, and there aren't enough of the far left to call them the majority of Oregonians. Most of us Oregonians have have some views that would line up with the right side of the Republican Party, and some views that would line up with the left side of the Oregon Democratic Party. But what most Oregonians want is they want the fighting to stop, they want the vitriol to stop, and they want a unified vision for how we make Oregon successful, prosperous, and we keep Oregon beautiful.
Do you believe that Oregon is experiencing a crisis in public trust right now? And if so, why?
I absolutely believe that Oregon is facing a crisis of public trust. Remember, I pastor a church in St. Helens, Oregon, and right now there are faculty members and administrators in jail in Oregon because of not being able to be trusted with our children. We have a crisis in this state where everyone thinks it almost doesn't matter if you turn out to vote. I shouldn't say everyone. A large number of Oregonians don't bother to turn out to vote because they don't think it matters who they vote for. Nothing ever changes. We have been infected with incompetence and corruption in our state bureaucracies for almost as long as I've been alive, if not longer. And I believe that it's time for the people of Oregon to simply take control of our government again. We are a government of the people, by the people, and for the people. The power has always been in our hands. It's time to fire the people in charge and put new leadership in. And that's what I want to lead the Republican Party to offer to the people of Oregon is we have the potential to be the solution to your problem if you will put us in charge and let us show you how good government looks.
Let me follow up with that by asking you, in what way, if any, have Oregon Republicans and the Oregon Republican Party contributed to our current crisis in public trust?
I think the vitriol in the dialogue from both sides has contributed to that, and we certainly have our part in that. I think that we should be a little bit more careful in our rhetoric. While I do believe that there is massive corruption in the Oregon government, and I do believe that there is incredible incompetence in Oregon's bureaucracies, I also believe that most of the people in those bureaucracies and in that government are good people going to work every day trying to do the jobs that they're being paid to do. And I think we should tone down the rhetoric and focus on finding and fixing the problems rather than finding and fixing the blame. I believe that Oregon Republicans need to do a better job of presenting a message to Oregonians that makes us contenders around the state. If we did so, then perhaps there would be more Republicans in office and better ideas in government and better principles in policy. So I believe that we could be doing a better job of providing an alternative source for Oregonians to find leadership. And I believe we're going to do that in the years ahead.
Which former Oregon Republican Party chair over the past 25 years was your favorite, and why?
Oh, wow. I'm sure that no matter who I answer with, it's going to probably get me in trouble. But my answer would be Alan Alley. I think Alan is a common sense conservative. He knows what it means to run for statewide office. He understands the process of elections. He knows the role of the party. And he's the kind of person who has been successful in the business world. He has always been active in politics. He is not simply someone who knows nothing about government. He's a brilliant man. I sat down and had coffee with him again recently. He and I see each other often, and he has a way of explaining processes that most people can would never have thought about. But when he explains it so simply, it's easy to grasp. So I would say Alan Alley, I think, would be my favorite.
Okay, now the question that people don't often like to get as a follow-up to that, which was which former Oregon Republican Party chair over the past 25 years was your least favorite and why?
I can't really say that I have a least favorite. I'm not trying to dodge the question, Daniel. I honestly have never thought about it in terms of, who do I think was the biggest disaster or who did the biggest harm, or because the fact is I'm not looking back over the course of the last 25 years and saying who's responsible for this mess. I believe that the Oregon Republican State Central Committee has chosen the leaders that they've chosen every 2 years for reasons that made sense to them at the time. Sometimes those chairmen lasted 2 years and sometimes they left early. But at the end of the day, every one of them was serving because they wanted to serve the Republicans of Oregon, and they wanted to see Oregon and all Oregonians prosper. So I've never really given much thought to who was my least favorite. There is no former chair of the Oregon Republican Party that I would point to and say, that guy was a real jerk. I can't believe they ever elected him. I don't have any of those thoughts about any of them. Some of them I know, some of them I don't know. The ones I know personally are all good people who wanted to do good things. And in some cases, it didn't work out. They didn't get to accomplish the things they wanted to. But what I look forward to is being the next person for every Oregon Republican to decide if I'm their favorite, their least favorite, or somewhere in the middle.
That concludes the questions that I've prepared for section 2. And so now we will hand it over to Chair Johnson. If he has any follow-up questions for you about Oregon culture and political history, then Chair Johnson, the floor is yours.
Looking at how our citizens in that are able to work or not work within Oregon, dependency on government, I was thinking one of my very good friends, who's a physician, thought about the health of our citizens. And he said that the most important aspect a person has is his ability to be employed, where families can be supported, their efforts are productive, and they have an inner realization of self-worth. Currently, Oregon has placed rules, regulations, financial handouts to people that, to me, might be counter to what my friend thinks are important. Because people need to have that inner self-worth. What must Oregon do to reduce the dependency on government handouts and the suppressive rules and regulations that they have? And is this a message that the ORP could expand upon to create a coalition of those diverse political groups? In general, is this a message that could be good for Oregonians across the state?
So the answer to your second question is yes. Unequivocally, unqualified, yes. It is a message that every Oregonian needs to hear, and it is a message that every Oregonian Republican needs to believe in. We know that we are an overregulated state. Businesses are not thinking, Oregon, that's a great place to go do business. We can fix that. And simply put, the problem is not that we need to change how we implement regulations. When your problem is overregulation, you simply need to get rid of some of the regulations. You need to decide which ones are actually helpful to the Oregon economy and which ones are actually hurting the Oregon economy. We need to have our own version of the Department of Government Efficiency that Donald Trump has implemented for the federal government. Isn't it interesting that in Oregon and 49 other states, the United States is the largest employer? The United States is the largest employer in each of the United States. That's scary, considering the fact that if you read our Constitution and you read the Federalist Papers and you read the diaries and the op-ed pieces that our founding fathers published, what you will find is that they wanted a small federal government with most of the governance to be done at the state level. But even the state governments were intended to be small. What we have done is we have bloated our bureaucracies to the point that more people, whether it's through Social Security, whether it's through a welfare program, or it's through government employment or government retirement, more people are drawing their financial support from a federal or state agency than are from the public or the private sector. How do we private sectorize America again? The answer is twofold. One is we have to dial back the bureaucracies that are stopping growth. We have to get rid of the regulations that are preventing growth. We have to ask about every single regulation that might cause a business to think about doing business in another state instead of Oregon. We have to ask, is this regulation necessary? Is it effective? And if not, it just needs to be thrown away. As to how we message it, it goes back to what I said a few minutes ago. Our government in Oregon is incompetent, it is corrupt, and there is no desire among the people in power to change the system because they're all benefiting from the system. So the only way this is going to change is if we start with the people at the top. I mean, the very top. We start with the governor's mansion and the state legislature, and we fire the people in charge and we put new leadership in place. And then they are given the assignment to drain Oregon's swamp, to remove the levels of bureaucracy that are redundant. If you stop and just take a moment and do a study on the redundant bureaucracies in our municipal, county, state, and federal governments, the redundant bureaucracies. In other words, where you have two bureaucrats sitting in two different offices that are essentially responsible to do the same thing. It's absurd how much money is being wasted on government redundant bureaucracy. How do we fix it? Well, it starts by firing the people in charge. Because if you have an organization, whether it's a nonprofit, a business, or a government, where you have massive corruption at every level and massive incompetence and overbloated bureaucracy, you don't come in and fire all the middle managers. You start by firing the board of directors, that would be the state legislature, and the chief executive officers, that would be the governor, the lieutenant governor, and of course, the secretary of state and the attorney general, the treasurer. If we want to fix the problem in Oregon's government, we have to start by firing the people who created the problem.
Thank you.
Good. Chair Johnson, if that's all the questions that you have from this section 2, we'll move to section 3, the Oregon Republican Party going forward. So,
my favorite topic.
So, Jerry, what is the role of the Oregon Republican Party to you? And you've already shared a little bit about this, and so just touch on that briefly.
So, simply put, Daniel, political parties exist to get their guys and gals elected. The number one singular focus, the number one singular message, as it says in the Oregon Republican Party bylaws, the number one job of the Oregon Republican Party is to get Republicans elected in Oregon. Because when Republicans get elected, our ideas become policy and our principles become law. And Republicans' Republican policies, Republican principles, these are better for Oregonians. Oregonians win when Republicans win. So the job of the Oregon Republican Party is to support our electeds, to send more reinforcements to them by winning more elections, and it is to raise money and provide the if you will, the volunteer infrastructure in every precinct in every county so that Republicans have a group of volunteers to rely on when they are brave enough to put their names on a ballot.
Please make the best argument you are capable of making about why Oregon needs a Democratic Party.
Simply put, I don't want a single party rule, even if it's my party. We've seen how that works around the world. We see how it works in communist China. We see how it works in socialist Russia. We see how it worked in Nazi Germany. Whenever you have one single party, one single cabal, if you will, that has all the reins of power, you get what we have in Oregon right now. So I believe that we need a Democratic Party. Even when our party is in the super majority and we have a Republican governor and all the great things that Republicans can bring to Oregon are being realized and people are enjoying and experiencing what it means to be free in their persons and free to do business without interference from government. If, Daniel, you don't have an opposition party that is alive and healthy and functional to push back, it's very easy, even for Republicans, to allow corruption to seep in. And so I believe the best argument for why there should be a Democratic Party is the same argument for why there must be a Republican Party. A two-party system allows for contest. And when you have contest, then you have the opportunity for accountability. But when you have what we have now, which is single party control, there is no accountability. And that's what I believe is missing in Oregon today. And I don't want to destroy the Democratic Party in Oregon. I actually would like to make it better. I would like to see the Oregon Democratic Party, instead of answering to the far left base of the party, to actually return to its roots and to be about individual liberty and to be about states' rights and to be about a system that is fair and equitable. If we could have a healthy Democratic Party that was made up of real Democrats and a healthy Republican Party that was made up of real Republicans, and both parties were healthy and alive, I believe that Oregonians would benefit. But a single party rule is never good.
So Oregon Democrats currently enjoy a political monopoly in Oregon. And you talked a little bit before about people moving in from out of state and increasing our population or increasing the voters, the number of people. But do you believe that's exclusive reason why Oregon Democrats currently enjoy a political monopoly in Oregon?
No, I also believe that over the course of the last century, we've allowed a liberal mindset to take over our public educational institutions from kindergarten through doctoral programs at public universities and colleges. I believe that we as a people have allowed our educators to become overly biased in one particular worldview system, and they are not representative of different viewpoints in America. And I think that has a lot to do with it as well. I also believe that there has been a heavy influx of people moving in from out of state. But the reason you can't say that's the entire reason is because you will find among registered Democrats people whose families have been here for over 100 years. You will find among registered Republicans people whose families moved in from California. It's not as simple as saying all the liberals came from California. As much as I would love to build a great, big, beautiful wall across the bottom of the state and stop all Californians with U-Hauls from coming over the border, the fact is that doesn't work in a free society. What I will say is people who are coming into this state fleeing the debacle that is California, remember, you're refugees, not missionaries. The way that you voted in California is why you're leaving California. So please check your politics at the door when you move into Oregon.
In your opinion, do the 2016 and 2024 election cycles at the federal level represent realignment elections?
I don't know. That's one of those things, Dan. I would like to think so. I mean, as a Republican, I would like to think so, right? Yeah, that means we're winning. But I think that that's one of those things that you have to look back on with some historical perspective to see what happens, right? In the next election cycle, and by that I mean the midterms, not the next presidential cycle, but when we get to the midterms in 2026, will we see what we often see, which is whichever party controls the White House loses seats, and whichever party is the opposition party gains seats? For whatever reason, and I can't put my finger on it, Americans actually claim to hate gridlock, but whatever party they perceive as being in power, they have a tendency to elect someone else in order to check that power. So maybe it's part of our natural distrust of too much power concentrated in too small a place. But we'll see what happens in the midterms in 2026 if we lose seats in the House or the Senate, or if we even lose control of one of those houses. It could happen. But I think only history will tell whether or not it's really a realignment. What I will say is that the first and second election of Donald Trump showed a coalition being built that went beyond Republicans and certainly what we often think of as traditional Republican demographics in terms of the voters that turned out for Donald. So I think that there is something happening in America. I think a lot of it just has to do with the fact that Americans are fed up. They're sick and tired of too much regulation, too much government in their lives, and they're tired of being taxed to death. And they're tired of feeling like they're the American taxpayer, the hardworking, employed American taxpayer is tired of feeling like they're at the bottom of the list of people who matter to their government. So I do think that there's a lot of that. And there's a lot of outcry against a system that seems to be set up to benefit everyone in the world except America's taxpayers.
From 1859 until 1986, Oregon Republicans were Oregon's natural majority party. In fact, from 1878 until 1985, 107 straight years, our number two constitutional official in Oregon government, the Oregon Secretary of State, was a Republican. What changed in 1986?
Once again, that's a good question. I wish it had a single answer, because then I could just state the answer and we'd be done. But it's actually too many factors to put your finger on. Obviously, the influx of people from out of state make a difference. And you may recall, because you and I are close to the same age, I think, you may recall when we were children, watching as our parents were talking about how housing prices were going up and up and up because so many people were moving into the strip, if you will. You know what I mean by the strip between Salem, Oregon, and Bellevue, Washington. You have this long strip where it seems like there's this massive migration that takes place in the late 80s and throughout the 90s. And I think that's a big part of it. I don't think that's all of it, but I think it's a big part of it. I also think that the Democratic Party in our state, if I can just give them credit for this, they did a very good job of messaging and realigning themselves in the 80s to respond to the Reagan Democrat defection that took place that led to, in 1984, Ronald Reagan taking not only Oregon, but 49 states. And I mean, that's never happened before or since, right? It was an incredible blowout for Ronald Reagan in 1984. I believe that the Democratic Party in Oregon and in some other states did a very good job of self-reflection, of realignment and reassessment, and they moved forward with a plan. And I believe that if there's one thing Republicans could do, to help turn the tide and help fix Oregon, the first thing we could do is we could do some self-reflection, we could do some realignment, and we could set our plan and agenda before the people of Oregon. So I think that it was a combination of those two things.
Okay. Many political observers would note that in 1986, the Oregon Citizens Alliance gained an upper hand in the management of the Oregon Republican Party. And the primary agenda of the Oregon Citizens Alliance was evangelical gay bashing in the 48th least church-going state in the Union. Is it possible that that also might have had an effect on Oregon Republican prospects?
It's possible. I don't think there has ever been gay bashing in the Republican Party platform. Simply saying, that a person believes that marriage is an institution created by God and only He can define it is not gay bashing. It only becomes gay bashing if you become obnoxious and start insulting people for having different views or different lifestyle than yours. So the Republican Party platform has never had gay bashing in it. Certainly, in both parties, you will always have people who will, revert to the lowest common denominator and say things that shouldn't be said in the public discourse. But it is certainly true that in a state like Oregon, where not everyone goes to church every Sunday, certainly the percentage has always been lower here than back east. There needs to be an understanding that there's going to be a different political dialogue than you would see, for instance, in my birth state of Arkansas. When we as Oregonians have discourse, we need to learn to treat each other with respect. So what I would say is, as Oregon Republicans and as Oregon Democrats, I think what the vast majority of Oregonians who are not affiliated voters would really like to see from us, I should say the vast plurality. There are more NAVs than there are Democrats or Republicans. I think what they would like to see from us is they would like to see us clean up our dialogue. I think they would like to see us engage in public discourse without obnoxious and hateful rhetoric.
Thank you. We will now proceed to the final portion of our third subject area, the bylaws and platform of the party you aspire to lead. As I noted to our audience, you were informed before the appearance that you should review the Oregon Republican Party bylaws and platform, as they are supposed to be the clearest expression of the priorities of your party. And in fact, you did me a favor when we were talking beforehand in pointing out that I had actually sent out old bylaws to you. So thank you very much for your diligence. What does the Oregon Republican Party bylaws have to say about what the Oregon Republican Party chair's job is?
I'm glad you brought that up, because I think that's something that a lot of people, when you see people running for an office, it's important that they should know what their job is supposed to be. So if you see me looking off to my left, it's because I actually want to read to you a section of the Article 8, Powers and Duties of the State Chairman. Notice that it says, in addition to performing the duties outlined in other articles of these bylaws and the duties of any organizational president, the state chairman shall, A, general charge, subject to the control of the ORP State Central Committee and the ORP Executive Committee, have general charge of the affairs of the Oregon Republican Party in Oregon. He or she shall promote the interests of the Oregon Republican Party and the National Republican Party. So simply put, general charge means exactly that. As the president, I should say the presiding officer, as chairman, I am acting as the president and CEO of the Oregon Republican Party. My job is to be aware of what's happening in our finances. My job is to raise money so that we can meet our expectations and complete the tasks that are set before us. My job is to make sure that our volunteers are well led so that they can know what's expected of them and how to perform. My job is to make sure that our county parties are well communicated with. Part of the job is also to run meetings. And without making any personal attacks on any former or current chairman, I believe that our state party, our central committee meetings could be better run. I think that managing the meetings well would eliminate a lot of the descent into argument and personal disputes that takes place on the floor sometimes. So I believe that being able to run a meeting is important. I'm a member of the National Association of Parliamentarians. I run hundreds of meetings of various sizes of groups. Organizing a meeting ahead of time and running the meeting well with the gavel is not something that frightens me. It's just something that has become a part of my life as an adult. Also, the Republican Party bylaws say that employee management is the role of the chairman. Right now, we don't have a paid staff. We don't have any employees. But if you look around the country and you look at the most effective state political parties, they have an executive director, they have a political director, they have a communications director, they have an office manager. They may even have a paid volunteer coordinator or PCP coordinator. We need to build out the party infrastructure. The state of Washington has a paid chairman, and that's a full-time job, and that's all they do is they manage that staff. We need to build out our party leadership and our party infrastructure. And in order to do that, we need to raise sufficient funds for operational costs to be able to bring in qualified professional mid-career level, not college students, to come in as our executive director, political director, and our communications director, especially. Those are the three most pivotal staff positions that every political party at the state level should have to function adequately. It's also important for the state chairman to be aware of what's happening in each of the ad hoc and standing committees that he has appointed chairman for. As a chairman of the Central Committee, I am responsible to know what the work of each committee is doing, and that's why it's up to me to appoint the chairs of the standing committees and the ad hoc committees. Now, with regard to our standing committees, those appointments are subject to the approval of the executive committee. Most of our committees are what are called ad hoc committees, meaning they're not standing. And those committee chairs are simply appointed by me, can be replaced by me, and it's my job to know that they're doing their jobs well. It's also, I think, extremely important to remember that as the chairman, I am supposed to be the liaison between the Oregon Republican Party and the Secretary of State's office. That means it is my responsibility to make sure that all of our forms that need to be turned in are turned in, that the Secretary of State is aware of what we're doing, and that all of our ORSTAR, which is the state reporting system where we report contributions and expenditures, that all of those things are kept up to date by the treasurer. Simply put, the bylaws of the party state that I am to have the general charge of the party, and what they imply in layman's terms is that I am the chief executive officer of the Republican Party and the presiding officer of the Central Committee and the Executive Committee.
Would you support televising future Oregon Republican Party State Central Committee meetings so that more Oregonians could actually see how Oregon Republicans conduct their business?
No. And the reason I would not is because the Oregon Republican Party is not a public entity. We are not a government. We're not a city government. We're not a county government. We're not a library board. We are not a public entity. We are a private organization. Sometimes we have to have conversations within our central committee or within our executive committee where we are making decisions that are hard decisions to make. For example, we're coming out of a primary season, and we have candidates who have been nominated by the Republican voters across the state. Every one of them deserves the best that their party can give them. But we only have so many volunteer hours. We only have so many dollars, and we can only allocate time and money according to what we have available to us. So we have to make choices about which races we're going to focus on. More often than not, it's not about picking a candidate. This is my brother-in-law's son, so we're going to support him. It's about picking a contestable race. More often than not, it's about, in this race, we are within 3 points of taking this seat. In this race, we have this seat and we're going to win by a landslide. In this race, we're never going to capture this seat in this election. We're behind by 15 points. But we have these races that are contestable, and we're going to focus on those. And in those, we're going to talk about which candidates do we have that we believe are the most, frankly, the most charismatic, that have the best conservative credentials, and that can win. And so we're going to be making hard decisions sometimes. And when we're making those hard decisions, I want the people who are members of the state central committee to feel free to speak without being afraid that some outside media source or some random YouTube channel is going to be able to pluck 5 seconds out of a 2-minute statement and spin it to say something that isn't what they intended. So to respect the privacy of our private organization, which is what a political party is, it's a private organization. You have to choose to be a member of it. I I believe that it would not be appropriate to televise our meetings.
Can you explain to our audience under the bylaws exactly how the precinct committee person, state central committee, county party, state party, how is that structured? And then by whom is the chair elected?
Absolutely. And I think that's one of the most important things that Republicans across the state should understand. If you ask the average Democrat or the average Republican in any state in the union to, I mean, just on the street, stop people randomly and say, "Are you a Republican, Democrat, or something else?" And they say, "Well, I'm a Republican. I'm a Democrat." Who is the chairman of your state party, the Oregon Republican Party in our case? Most of them would say, "That's a thing. I didn't know that existed." What does the chairman do? So it's a very good question, and I hope that we'll in the next couple of minutes be able to help some people who may be wondering that very thing. So here's the way political parties are organized, especially major political parties. In every voting precinct in Oregon, if you look at your voter ID card, it has a precinct number on it. In every precinct in Oregon, there are a certain number of precinct committee persons in each precinct based on the population within your precinct. And any person who is a registered Republican or conversely a registered Democrat or registered Constitution Party, any person who is registered with their party can register with their local elections office to place their name on the ballot to represent their precinct in their county. And so when you do that, you simply fill out a form with your elections office in your county. You can do that in person. You can do it online. Most people today do it online. Every 2 years, I do it online. And what you're doing is you're saying, I want to represent all the Republican neighbors in my precinct in our county central committee. And then you become a voting member of the Republican Party County Central Committee in your county. And you are voting in your county to represent your neighbors. So at every level, the Republican Party is a representative body. County Central Committee is made up of the representatives of the precincts who ran during the primary election to represent the Republicans in their precincts. At the County Central Committee organizational meeting, they elect officers for their county. Among those are the chairman, the vice chairman, treasurer, secretary. And in addition to the automatic 2 delegates that every county gets to the state central committee, chairman and vice chairman of their party, if you have at least 7,500 registered Republicans, you may get an additional delegate. If you have 15,000 more than that, then you will get another delegate, and another 15,000 gets you another delegate. It's a system actually set up and codified in the Oregon Revised Statute as to how many delegates you get based on the registration within your county in your party, voter registration, that is. So the precinct committee persons make up their county central committee. They elect their chair, vice chair, and however many delegates their county gets. And those representatives from each county then make up the state central committee. The Oregon Republican Party State Central Committee then is made up of the chair and vice chair of every county party and the delegates that each county has based on their population. So there are in all about 133 voting members of the Oregon Republican Party. In addition to the county parties, there are also representatives of the congressional district Republican committees, which are all elected at our convention every 4 years, the same place where we elect our Republican electors for president and our Republican delegates to the national convention. The very same time we do that, we elect our congressional district Republican officers as well. And so the chair and vice chair of every congressional district and the chair and vice chair of every county, plus the delegates from every county, and the officers of the ORP, which are the current chairman, vice chairman, treasurer, secretary, national committee man, and national committee woman. Those officers then are all part of the central committee. So in all, we have about 133 voting members who have the ability to choose the officers of the party this coming February 22nd. Those officers or their alternates or proxies will gather together, and we will form a new central committee based on the elections that we had in each of our counties in November. We will elect officers and we will adopt rules to govern ourselves, which essentially means we'll debate the bylaws and see if we want to make any changes before we vote to adopt them again. And so out of those 133 people, I hope every one of them will come, because every one of them has been elected by the people in their counties or their CDs, and they are supposed to come and participate in choosing the chairman, the vice chairman, the treasurer, and the secretary who will govern our party for the next 2 years.
Now I'd like to transition over to a few questions I have about the platform. So first question is, why does the Oregon Republican Party have a platform?
You know, I think there are a lot of candidates who would like to ask that same question. The answer is the Oregon Republican Party, like every political party, has a platform so that we can have a general agreement on the things that we believe in. Every organization has to have something that it stands for, has something that it means, something that it does. What is our purpose? What is our function? In order to understand what does it mean to be a Republican, there have to be certain principles that we agree on as a party. So the answer to the question, why does the Oregon Republican Party have a platform? It is so that we as a party know who we are and where we stand, and our candidates, when they choose to run as Republicans, they know what their party expects to be their positions on issues before they sign up to be Republican candidates.
At 18 single-spaced pages and 6,335 words, do you think the Republican Party platform should be expanded, contracted, or left exactly the same?
Contracted. I was with the Oregon Republican Party delegation that went back to the Republican National Convention this past spring. And Donald Trump sent to our platform committee at that convention a much shorter version of the platform than we had as a national party previously. And essentially, it was all the same things in terms of all the same issues, but instead of it being pages and pages on each one, it was a short, simple statement that was easy to understand, that if you were going door to door in your neighborhood and someone said, so what does your party believe about this? You could say this because it's not a page and a half long, right? I think it should be contracted. I would like to see the Republican Party at our next platform convention think about following the example of our Republican president, Donald J. Trump, and the Republican National Convention, which is, by the way, the convention every 4 years is the highest level of authority of the party, because it is the level of authority that is closest to the voting bloc. So we have to remember that at that convention, the Republican Party nationally said, our party platform is too long, it's too complicated, we need to use shorter statements to make our point. Not suggesting there's anything we need to take out of the platform in terms of principle, only that we need to be more circumspect and brief. Our platform needs to be long on brevity. I'll just put it that way. So we need to make it where it's more bullet pointed.
Okay. Given the fact that you're supporting the contraction of the platform, but that you've just expressed that the sentiments therein are not something that you have a lot of concern with, I'd like to specifically draw your attention to Section 11 of the Oregon Republican Party platform, which is entitled Individual Liberty and Limited Government. And specifically, if you can read to us Section 11.3, and I think, let me just make sure that I have a shorter quote from it. I just want to make sure that 11.3 is, I'm not asking you to read something. No, there it is. Okay, please, if you have it handy, otherwise I can read it. Read for us, 11.3 of the platform, and I'll try to not drop mine.
We advocate limiting the scope and jurisdiction of the federal and state government addressing abuses in commerce and the general welfare clauses.
Okay, now I'd like you to turn back to Section 9, which is healthcare, and Section 9.4 specifically. And if you can read that for me, I would like to then ask you some questions about those two sections and how you see them fitting together or not.
Okay. We are pro-life. Therefore, we support the sanctity of life from conception to natural death and are opposed to abortion and physician-assisted suicide. We promote pursuing full disclosure of all known risks and complications of abortion, surgically and chemically, and the organ harvesting and eugenic practices of the abortion industry.
Okay, so do you see any tension between those two sections?
Not especially. I think I understand what you might perceive as tension in that on the one hand, we're saying we want less government in our lives. And on the other hand, we're saying we want, we are opposed to abortion. And isn't that, some would argue, isn't that contradictory? Because how can you say you want government out of our lives, but you want government to tell someone they can or can't have an abortion? Is that what you mean by tension?
Well, my opinion about it is probably not relevant, but I think you can see, as you just described, how those who there might be people who read that and say, well, on the one hand, we want less government interference in people's lives, except for when it's a policy that we wish to pursue. And so if you can just help talk us through from your perspective, how do you reconcile those two?
So simply put, it's very similar to our discussion earlier about the topic of slavery for the Republican Party. Okay, you can make the argument that there is tension between the idea of saying we believe in states' rights and saying that the federal government has an interest in preventing the abusive institution of slavery. Well, the reason that the Republican Party has always been an anti-slavery party is because of what it says in the Declaration of Independence. It is the role of government. It is the reason governments are instituted among men to secure the rights of individuals. And there is no more helpless and an individual, no more person needing protection than an infant, especially an infant that is still in the womb. And so if you understand, as I do, that life begins at conception, then no one has the right to make the decision that it's okay to end the pregnancy, which is simply a euphemism for kill the child. So the answer is, it is the role of government to protect citizens. It would be like saying we should not have laws against rape and murder and theft because those are anti-freedom. No, the whole purpose of a government is to protect a citizen's rights, especially the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, from those who would take that right away from them. So I don't really see that there's tension there because it is the role of government to protect citizens.
Well, so there might be some political tension, though, that I want to follow up a little bit with. In 2018, Oregonians voted on Measure 106 concerning public funding of abortions. By 2-1, Oregonians rejected one could read it that Oregonians rejected Section 9.4 of the Oregon Republican Party platform. Do political parties that embrace unpopular policies tend to do well electorally?
Ask Abraham Lincoln.
Fair enough. Numerous Republican statewide candidates since 1990 have been anti-abortion, like Monica Webby in 2008, Newt Bueller in 2014, 2018, and 2020, and U.S. Representative Lori Chavez-DeRemer in 2022 and 2024. Given the plain language of the Oregon Republican Party platform, are pro-choice Republicans welcome in the Oregon Republican Party?
Yes. And I would like to simply, if you go up to Section 9 healthcare and you read what it says in the preamble, families and individuals have the sole responsibility and right to make their own healthcare decisions, including the use of the free market system. This is the surest way to provide healthcare that protects the patient-provider relationships and promotes individual freedom. I think I would add to that one sentence and eliminate everything else in this plank of the platform. The one sentence would be, the Oregon Republican Party is pro-life, period. Now, having said that, frankly, I think that Oregon Republicans have to stop letting the narrative be handed to us and the terms of the narrative dictated to us, and focusing on issues that are not really issues that are on the ballot today. For example, as a conservative Christian, a Christian pastor, I do not believe that there is such a thing from a spiritual perspective as a marriage that is not between a man and a woman. However, the Supreme Court has already ruled on this. This is not something that our legislators are going to be asked to vote on, and that issue has come and gone. I do not believe that it is necessary for us to allow ourselves to be distracted by issues from previous generations, something that has been decided many years ago, in some cases decades ago, that we're not going to be changing in the next 2 years or the next 20 years or maybe even the next century. Having said that, I would like to see Republican candidates and the Republican Party focus on the real and present dangers facing Oregonians from the policies and bureaucracies that are being foisted upon them by our current leadership. I would like us to not get so tangled up in the weeds of social issues, many of which are beyond our control, to change at the current time. There is not the will among the Oregonian populace today to make a change to our abortion policy as it relates to all of abortions. But many people simply do not consider, most Oregonians, when polled, Daniel, are against third trimester abortions. So is there a reasonable conversation on abortion we could have as far as when it becomes too late to terminate a pregnancy? I think most Oregonians would be more open to that discussion than simply asking every politician, whether they're a Democrat or a Republican, to say all abortion's bad, all abortion's good. I think a more reasonable debate would be, a reasonable political discourse would be, where do most Oregonians feel the line should be drawn in the sand, and we say it is now too late to terminate this pregnancy because this is clearly a human being that is living. But more importantly, I don't think that the issue of abortion and the issue of gay marriage are actually issues that are facing Oregonians on their ballot in 2025 or 2026. I think that for the most part, those are issues beyond the control of our electeds, and we should be focusing on the issues that are actually real and present in our world today, such as why our economy is going off a cliff, and why we have children living in tents, and why we have fentanyl poison drugs being sold to young people against their will.
Oregon Republicans have leaned pretty heavily into allegations of electoral fraud to explain going up until 2 election cycles ago, 1 in 33. I think it's about 1 in 40 now, in statewide elections since 1990. Section 2 of the Oregon Republican Party platform is on election integrity, and it has 17 subsections. In your own words, why is election integrity important to Oregon Republicans?
So let me start by reading the preamble. Secure, accurate, transparent, and free elections are essential to a government of we the people. We agree on the following key principles to protect Oregon's election systems. I believe that statement, secure, accurate, transparent, and free elections are essential to a government of we the people, is a principal statement most Oregonians would agree with. Mm-hmm. I believe that on the issue of election integrity and on the issue of election security, there's a lot of work to be done nationwide, and this is not a new problem. We're still hearing about the concerns people had about the 1960 election and the potential registration and ballots printed and ballots being counted for persons in Chicago who may have been dead, which might have changed the outcome of the Illinois electors in the 1960 election as to whether Illinois would have gone for Kennedy or whether it would have gone for Nixon. We're still hearing about LBJ's first election to Congress and whether or not there was a mysterious box of ballots that showed up and if those ballots were legitimate. And that goes back to the 1940s. Everyone remembers the scandals in New York as people were being registered to vote as they were getting off the boats by politicians and political party activists, even though they were not even yet citizens back in the 1800s. In short, I can remember as a child learning in history about times when people on one side of a town on that was divided by a river would intentionally take out the bridge on the day of election just to keep the other side from being able to vote. Election integrity is not a new issue. It's never going to become a non-issue. What I can say is there are sufficient reasons for us to say that the fairest and freest way for us to conduct elections is to do it in person. A person shows up, they show their ID, we don't have any question about who they are, and they cast their ballot the old-fashioned way. I think that would eliminate a lot of the concern people have about if you just are mailing out ballots, you don't know for sure who's returning them. I also believe that we have seen nationwide, not only in Oregon, that there have been irregularities that have not been explained. And one of the best things that every state government could do is to make the process as transparent as possible and to answer all of the questions.
Can you read Section 2.1 of the Oregon Republican Party bylaws?
We support the elimination of mail-in voting and computerized tabulation of votes. Voting shall occur on a single day and in person using a paper ballot completed by hand and counted by hand at local precincts. All voter registration shall be maintained locally. The state shall be prohibited from maintaining voter registration rolls at the state level. Absentee ballots may only be mailed upon application and verification of eligibility of the voter. Ballot harvesting shall be outlawed.
Yep. Given the fact that vote by mail was voted in by Oregon voters via ballot measure 60 in 1998 by a margin of 69.4% to 30.6%, what is your plan to repeal it?
The only plan to repeal it would be for the people of Oregon to decide it's not good policy. The only legitimate way to change our minds as a society is for the people to have the opportunity again to vote on it and to make a different decision. So I believe that separate and apart from something happening like a change to federal law that affects all states and how we do our elections, for the people of Oregon to be able to change our mind should require, once again, a vote of the people.
Is it possible that those Republican politicians who are shouting voter fraud as a catch-all explanation for Oregon Republican Party statewide underperformance might actually be contributing to Oregon Republican Party electoral underperformance?
Anything's possible, Daniel. I'm sure that there are people in Oregon who believe that the elections are completely fair, completely accurate, and that those people may say, this is a conspiracy theory somewhere along the lines of, there not actually ever being a person on the moon. And that those people might say they're less inclined to vote for Republicans because many Republicans feel that elections are not fair and free. However, I would point out that those people are probably not likely to vote Republican anyway. So I'm not terribly concerned. What I will say is, once again, the number one problem facing Oregonians is that we have a corrupt and inept government with bureaucracies that are out of control and legislation that ties up our businesses and ties the hands of our people so that it's difficult for people to earn a living. If we together can agree that our government needs to be fixed, then it might be reasonable to say if our government has demonstrated a lack of transparency, then every area of our government, including election management, is an area that should be re-examined and that we are asking for more transparency in.
After the 2020 election cycle, the Oregon Republican Party passed a resolution denouncing January 6th as a, quote, false flag operation, close quote. Were you a part of Oregon Republican Party leadership at that time?
So at that time, I believe I was an alternate delegate to the Oregon Republican Party State Central Committee. I was not actively involved in party leadership at the time.
Do you agree or disagree with the resolution that was passed?
I don't have the resolution in front of me. I will simply say we have seen evidence that there were FBI assets in the crowd. That has come out in congressional hearings, who were essentially sent there on behalf of the FBI. So we know there were people there who were planted. We don't know if there were people who were sent there by other groups, such as Antifa or some other group that might, want to create tension. What I will say is that the vast majority of the people who were at the rally, the vast majority of the people who marched from the rally location down to the Capitol, did not go into the Capitol. They did not break any laws, and most of them went home when they were dispersed. And I honestly believe that the issue of January 6th is one of those things that it's salacious, it's sexy, it gets clicks on the internet, but it was also more than 4 years ago, and I think it's time to move forward in Oregon and in the United States of America and put those events behind us.
By my count, and this is, I hear you, and I'm just going to leave this segment by noting that by my count, 9 people who are either Oregonians or Christina Malaman was formerly of Portland. I think she lives in Texas now, including 2 Oregonians who actually live in Baker County. And Chair Johnson had clarified it was originally reported as Umatilla County, Mr. Klein, the Klein brothers. Concerning the president's, any president's exercise of the pardon and commutation power, as a chairman of a state political party, do you have any say in anything? Does the Oregon Republican Party have any say in the executive's exercise of his or her discretion in the using the pardon power?
No one has any say in it. The voters have a say when they elect the chief executive, whether it's the governor of a state or the president of the union. The reality is, Daniel, the powers of pardon are virtually unfettered in both the federal constitution and most state constitutions. It is by design a power that is somewhat close to absolute. And I say that because if you have a system where you have, for example, you have a trial and the trial is clearly unfair, the jury is clearly out of control, a person is convicted of something that most people can tell they didn't do, the final court of appeals is actually the governor or the president, depending on if it's a state or federal crime. Mm-hmm. You can have someone who can say, you know what, even though there may be no legal recourse through the courts to right this wrong, I'm going to right this wrong. It's also true that many times these issues get resolved by presidents and governors simply because they are politically so sensitive that that courts are shy to make a statement on it. They're reticent to get involved at the appellate levels. And so many times it requires a state executive to say, you know what, it's time to end this. It's time to put this to bed. And the pardon power exists for that reason.
Mr. Trump seems to be about as popular in Oregon as Mr. Biden was popular in Idaho. Why does Mr. Trump's approach to governance not resonate in Oregon, if you agree with the premise of my question?
I don't think it's Mr. Trump's approach to governance that doesn't resonate in Oregon. I think there are things about Mr. Trump personally and his personality that do not resonate well with some Oregonians, with many Oregonians. It comes back to what we talked about earlier. We are a party. We are a state that is very divided on the edges of its party. Liberals tend to be very liberal. Conservatives tend to be very conservative. And because of that, I think you will see that a political figure like Donald Trump, who is certainly not opposed to being controversial, who takes hard positions, is going to be someone who is absolutely despised by a certain group of the population. I would say that that Donald Trump is not going to be on an Oregon ballot again. So the real question for us as Republicans is, who are we going to nominate for governor? Who are we going to run in the races for state legislature? Who are we going to run for Congress? I'm not really concerned about how popular Donald Trump will be among the non-Republican, if you will, factions of the Oregon Republic, or of the state of Oregon, because he's not going to be on a ballot in Oregon again or anywhere else.
Um, Following up with the relationship between the national chief executive and the state parties, customarily, when one's political party wins at the federal level, some state level talent is steered towards political jobs in the victorious administration. When Mr. Biden's elected, the assumption is that some Oregon Democrats will be appointed. When Mr. Trump wins, the expectation is that some Republicans. Given the fact that there are about 4,000 appointed positions and Oregon constitutes 1.15% of the national population, that should mean about 43 jobs go to Oregonians. What is your plan to place as many Oregonians? And we usually, Oregon Republicans have customarily underperformed in terms of the Oregon Republican Party placing Oregonians in these positions, even though it is a traditional way in which young, promising political talent is given an opportunity to show what they're capable of doing. Do you have a plan to place as many Oregonians in positions at the federal level when you are chair?
Well, simply put, those decisions are made by one person, and that is by the president of the United States for the most part. I mean, granted, I understand there's 40,000 positions. He has teams of people that are working with him and on his behalf. But I would certainly not tell President Trump who to choose. But I absolutely would be available to the Trump administration at a moment's notice with a list of qualified candidates for any positions that they are looking for, as you say, good young talent to fill. Or for that matter, good experienced talent to fill. My only caveat to that being I'm not going to be one of them, because my job is here in Oregon fighting for all Oregonians as the chairman of the Republican Party, and I have no interest in a different political path than serving in that capacity as long as the party will have me.
And I guess the last question, as a follow-up to that, is that the Oregon Republican Party platform is very explicit about supporting term limits, and yet in the past, Oregon statewide Republican Party officials have served as long as 20 years. Two questions. First of all, what is your position about the relative merits and demerits of term limits? And second of all, what is your position about many Oregon Republicans who have in the past sought the chairmanship appear to have sought it as a stepping stone to quote unquote more important jobs, presumably those which pay.
Right.
So if you can address those two issues, first of all, what is your position about how long you would stay in if you have thoughts about that? And second of all, what exactly is the way forward concerning those issues of balancing the experience versus going forward? And I guess third is this a stepping stone to something that you actually want?
So let me start with the first one. My position is that term limits as it relates to public offices are very different than term limits as it relates to private organizations. Mm-hmm. Very high functioning corporations do not change CEOs every 2 years. Very high functioning nonprofits do not change CEOs every 2 years. I believe that the Oregon Republican Party in recent years has suffered from a lack of consistent leadership. And I don't mean that as in any way criticism of any particular chairman, just that the length of term of a chairman hasn't been long enough, in my opinion. I believe that it should be common for a chairman to serve 6 to 10 years. I believe that the term limit that is reasonably placed upon the chairman of a political party is he can only serve as many terms as he can get elected for. That would be the answer to the first part of your question. And you had three parts. What was the second part?
It really, I was trying to remember what the third part was, so I was just trying to buy time for
Okay.
myself.
So
But really, the
is
third
this a
part
stepping stone?
is this a stepping stone for you?
No, I have no desire to serve in public political office ever again. I do not intend to put my name on a ballot for any office, an election ballot, public ballot for any office other than PCP ever again. Um, while I am old enough to know better than to say never, absolutely never, ever, under any circumstances would I. But I will tell you straight up, I have been on a ballot. I have been, elected to a public office before. I believe that my talents better serve Oregonians at large and the Oregon Republican Party. They are better served as an organization if I am serving in the party leadership rather than in public office. So I'm not interested in getting someone elected governor who will give me a government job. I'm not interested in being appointed to a federal position. I'm not interested in running for Senate or running for a lieutenant governor. I will serve as the chairman of the Republican Party for 10 years if the party wants to keep reelecting me because they see that we are making progress. We are becoming more organized. We are winning more elections and we are raising more money. And in every sense, we are winning. If the Oregon Republican Party decides to fire me, I will continue pastoring and serving in the party wherever the party will have me to serve.
Excellent. Well, that concludes the third section of our questions. And so I'd like to hand the floor over to Chair Danny Johnson to ask any follow-up questions that might have occurred to him.
Thank you, Daniel. Jerry, if elected, one of the things continuing this conversation in regard to terms of the position, what do you feel your role is in regard to an exit strategy? Should an exit strategy for this position be in place or thought of by chairs, say 6 months in advance of the upcoming elections?
I think so. And honestly, I'm not even sure that 6 months is long enough. I think that whether it's in 2028 or 2045 or 2048, when I know that I'm running for my last time as chairman, I will probably make it known, early in my term, if not when I'm running for reelection, that I expect this to be my final time. But I believe the exit strategy should be that some goals have been set and those goals have been met. So there are essentially three metrics that I would use to determine that my job is done. One is that we have taken control of the House and the Senate in the state legislature. The second is that the Republican Party in 34 to 36 counties is effective, operational, and under good leadership, and has the tools that it needs from me as the party chairman to go on and be successful. And the third is that a really good successor is on the horizon. And I don't mean a hand-picked successor. I just mean that there are good people who could run and replace me that are in party leadership, that have the experience and the organizational knowledge to carry forward with to build on what we've done. It always concerns me when, it happens a lot in politics, after a big election, people who ran for public office and didn't get the job they wanted will decide they're going to run for a party job, chairman of their county, chairman of the state party. The reality is, if they don't have the experience within the party, understanding how the party works, that's usually why we end up with 12 to 18-month terms for a chairman, because they didn't know what they were getting into. They didn't really understand what the job was. And I think it's important that, when my time is coming to an end, if I've done my job well, then there will be people that have been raised up within the party at the county levels, at the CD levels, and within the officer ranks to where there will be obvious successor choices who will be ready to take over.
Thank you. So many of the many of the new delegates that were elected in May of 2023 are going to be presenting themselves at the next Central Committee meeting of the ORP. Many of them will not really know the candidates very well. As a past newbie, it takes some time to get to know those folks. In light of this conversation, I think it would be nice to understand a little bit about what makes Jerry tick. So I have a question that I usually used when I was hiring folks for my private business. And I hope that it's not too invasive. That would be someone or something in your past has such an impact on you that it makes you the person you are today. Who or what was that situation?
Well, it's both a who and a what. The most singularly important moment in my existence and in the shaping of who I am today happened in 1979 in my family home on Bigelow Street in Olympia, Washington, when I accepted Jesus Christ as my Savior. Um, the the person that I am today, that is of any value to anyone, comes from the power and presence of God, uh, the Holy Spirit living inside of me and empowering me. Every major decision that I have made in prayer. I have made with a help for with a request for wisdom to help me make the decision. That doesn't always mean I've made the right decisions. There are times when I would, look back and say, I wasn't listening very well when whatever God was trying to tell me on that day. But I entered the ministry because God called me to. I married my wife because I believed that God was calling me to be her husband, and I loved her. Um, there is nothing that has been more impactful in my life than the person and presence of Jesus, the Word of God, the Bible, and the people of God in the churches that I have been a member of and have pastored over the course of my life. From a non-faith perspective, as much as anything in life can be non-faith perspective, I would say that unquestionably, my father is the single most influential person in my life. Entrepreneur, knew what it was to succeed, knew what it was to fail in business, knew what it was to try to find the balance between work life and family life and faith life and family life. He was a student of history, though never really formally trained. He was he was a man who had a deep interest in politics, both personally and academically. And I learned a lot from my father. And aside from my father in heaven and my father on earth, I would have to say that the famous person I've never met who had the greatest impact on me was Ronald Reagan. I did get to spend some quality time with his son, Michael. And, we played golf together once, and when I had him up for a speaking engagement in Washington years ago. And I can tell you, as a child growing up in the 80s, I was born in 1974. The first election I really remember was honestly the 1980 election, but even more the 1984 election. My political philosophy and political ideology was shaped more by Ronald Reagan than any other person historically or in my lifetime.
Thank you.
Is all the questions you have,
I'm
Chair
done,
Johnson?
Daniel.
Well, Danny Johnson from Baker County, the head of the Baker County Republican Party, thank you so much for serving as our referee today. You added immeasurably to the depth and quality and substance of the program. Jerry Cummings from Columbia County. Thank you so much for coming on board today, and thank you so much for sharing the journey which has led you to standing for the chairman of the Oregon Republican Party as we move forward. We hope that should you be selected by Oregon Republicans, we hope that we can look forward to having you on the program again with your leadership team so that you can continue engaging with the Oregon people and that we can all continue talking. Thank you so much, for both of you, for joining us today. We will look forward to seeing you again, Chair Johnson, in a couple of days for the next episode. And we wish you the best of luck, Jerry, in all your endeavors going forward.
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure, and I look forward to being back, Daniel.
Thanks. We here at Town Hall 2025 wonder if maybe Oregon doesn't need more politics, but clearer politics. And maybe, just like teenagers, our politicians could benefit from clearer boundaries that you set. To support your responsibility for self-government, you're working to revive an Oregon where once we were able to disagree without being disagreeable. In the coming months, we hope to bring you, in their own words, leaders from all of our political parties. Thank you for joining us on Series 1, the race for Oregon Republican Party Chair 2025. Next up will be Series 2, the race for Democratic Party Chair 2025. I'm Daniel Crow, and this is Town Hall 2025. Until next time, let's keep talking.